Hello and welcome to a tabletop simulator demo for Encounters Shattered Wastes. This is a game that's coming out in Kickstarter fairly soon. The Kickstarter, I believe, should be starting in February, and it is almost February at the time of this recording. We are just on the cusp of it. This game is designed by Ryan Farmer, and yeah, this game, I was just sort of browsing a little bit on Kickstarters and stuff like that. As I normally do, even though my wallet does not like it. And I came across this game, and as you know, I do love my good old cooperative boss battlers, and this one caught my eye, especially when I'm currently playing a video game called Chained Echoes, which is a good homage to the good old JRPGs of yesteryear. And so this game caught my eye, and as you can tell by the figures and stuff like that, it definitely has that awesome JRPG aesthetic, that 16-bit, 32-bit JRPG aesthetic. And so I wanted to check it out. So I reached out to the developer, I reached out to Almanac Games, who's publishing it, and I wanted to see if I could get a prototype copy. They currently don't have any physicals in play at the moment. However, I will be hopefully getting one in the future, but they did give me access to their public tabletop simulator demo. I think, I don't know if I'm going to be able to, but I'll ask when I email them and show them this video, if I can put the link to the tabletop simulator demo into my YouTube description. Otherwise, I'll link their website, which you can sign up to keep up to date on the project, as well as get access through that. So, Encounter Shattered Waste. It is a 1-to-4 player cooperative boss battler, where it's pretty much exactly the name. It's very straightforward. It doesn't beat around the bush or anything like that. It's you and potentially three other friends going up against one of these big baddies. Additionally, you can play it solo. However, you still are required to have a minimum of 2-character combination. So it's not true solo with only one character. You do have to have a minimum of 2 characters two-handing it. But we're going to go through a little bit of setup. I'll play through a couple of rounds probably and just sort of showcase exactly how the game is played. And then maybe, as a separate video, we'll do an actual Let's Play and actually try and take on one of these big bads. I've only done a little bit of tutorial and a little bit of basic setup against the Guardian here, which is just the basic sort of tutorial enemy, or your beginner enemy, I guess I should say. And also, let's, if you care about flavor text, let's read a little bit about what this world is all about, shall we? At the outskirts of the desolate fringes stands the border of the shattered wastes. Clouds of ash obscure the sun, while heavy winds prevent even the hardiest of plants from taking root. Cracks in the ground glow deep with aquas and purples, faintly illuminating the formless shadows lurking in the distance. Crystalline spires grow like trees, only to be broken by chaotic streaks of lightning assaulting the sky. This is a place of corrupt, untamed magic that few sane souls volunteer to enter. Yet, like a moth drawn to flame, the allure of its undeniable power entices the strongest of warriors to venture forward. They yearn to discover the answer to their most burning questions. Where does this seemingly unlimited magic come from, and why is it spreading? So, this just goes over exactly what I described. A game for 1-to-4 players, cooperative, a boss battler that you control up to 2 to 4 characters to explore the land of untamed magic known as the Shattered Wastes. Now, this game actually also caught my eye mechanically, not only because of its JRPG inspiration, but also because it honestly has some things similar to Aeon Trespass Odyssey, which I sort of like. There is sort of like an escalation mechanic. It is a lot about you escalating as well as the boss, and we'll get into that in a second. So, first things first, how do we start the game? So, since we're just going to be doing a little quick thing, we'll just choose 2 characters. Again, if you are playing solo, you have to choose minimum 2 characters, but you can choose all 4 characters if you want to play with a full party. Obviously, the game is scales, depending on how many characters are in play. We're just going to grab the Lancer here and grab his player card, as well as his acrylic standee. I believe I will be getting a set of acrylic standees delivered, so I can show them off in the physical form. However, no, that'll be a separate video, of course. And you'll notice that the standees have 2 different modes. You have your heroic mode, and then you have your shattered mode, which we'll get into a little bit, but shattered is sort of the mechanic where you shatter yourself and sort of thematically taking control of chaos for extra power at the cost of being a little bit more fragile and being a little bit closer to dying fully. But we'll get into that in a little bit. So we're going to grab the Lancer, grab his card. So just going over the character sheet at the top there just sort of shows which acrylic standee goes to which character, what the name is, as well as what their status is. You can top right there. The little star is considered just being heroic, and flipping it over, it'll be the shattered side. You can also what is called Reclaim Your Character, which when you are in the Shattered mode, sort of re-enter the heroic stance. However, that'll be sort of your last life where you can no longer flip between being Shattered or heroic at that point. Sort of your last stand, I guess you should say. And then you also have your HP, your MP, which each character will get their own tracker. Pretty straightforward. A lot of the stuff I'm not going to go super into. You know, HP, if it goes to 0, you die type of thing. Your MP is your magic points. Again, if you've played any other game, even if you haven't played JRPGs, you should understand what that means. So this will indicate what their starting totals are. So HP is set to 12 for the Lancer, MP is set to 7, and that is going to be also your maximum, so you cannot raise your values above that value. This little dice symbol shows how much you roll when you're doing your basic attack. The middle number is showcasing how much damage you do when you successfully complete a basic attack. And then the number on the right is on your attack dice, or when you're doing an ability roll or recovery roll. If you get that value between all of your dice, that'll be a critical success, and that'll of course give you extra benefits, and we'll get into that later. Each character also has a unique ability both on their heroic side and a different ability on their shattered side. So for Lancer, whenever he moves, essentially, he can move to any frontline space, and then also when he finishes a move, he can actually get a free attack, which is very, very cool. And your reaction abilities can only happen once per round, so you can't do it both times you activate, but it still can be pretty strong. At the bottom is going to be the different amount of ability cards and item cards that you're going to be drawing and drafting, and so this is sort of one of the cool replayability factors. Is every single time you choose a new game and choose a new character, you're going to draft a random set of abilities that will sort of shape what type of character you're going to be playing for that specific battle, because for the most part, most of these abilities are going to stay with you for the whole battle. However, there are ways to cycle through them and grab different abilities. However, not every character has access to that. So first things first, you can see that there's going to be 1 attack card for the Lancer. There's going to be 5 support cards for the Lancer. And again, we aren't getting these. These are just simply being drafted. And then we get 1 magic card and 1 item card. And then you choose 3 of these. So you actually only get to choose 3 of them, so you definitely have to make a decision on what you want to do. But we're, just for the sake of it, we're just going to say we're going to take this ability, active ability, this attack. We're going to take, this defensive ability, and we'll take this item. And then we'll put the rest back in the deck. All right. Decks are shuffled, and we're ready to draw the next character. Additionally, the bottom track I didn't speak about, but that is your threat level, and this is going to be a main mechanic of the game, and one of the things that sort of reminds me of Aeon Trespass Odyssey. So we have another character we can grab. Let's just grab the Ronin here. Let's grab his stuff, and I'll just get this character set up in the same thing, just to sort of speed things up. All right, I have the Ronin set up here, and you can see the Ronin actually had access to drafting 4 attack cards and 4 items, but gets access to 0 support or magic cards. So we have chosen our cards, and we've picked our characters, and we can place them anywhere on the board. There's a front lane and a back lane. Of course, that is going to matter for certain attacks and things like that, so pay attention to what your cards do. We'll just, of course, have the Lancer in front. We'll just sort of split them up like this. Now we choose our enemy, and enemies are the bosses in the game here. Obviously, we're just going to choose the Guardian, and the Guardian gets placed in the center, as well as the Guardian has 2 different decks. Or each enemy has 2 different decks. You have 2 different rage decks, and then you have their character sheet as well. So in the top just has their title, as well as the little bar there indicates what their difficulty is. Obviously, the Guardian is sort of the basic enemy. In the top right indicates their status. So there's a healthy state and a weakened state. Just similar to you have a shattered state, they can potentially get stronger as the battle escalates as well. And then this number is going to be their refresh value, so we'll get to that a little bit later, as well as the other numbers on there. They have an ability. So the Guardian actually has an ability that sort of helps you, when you die for the first time, you essentially come back with 1 HP, so he sort of helps you, funny enough. At the very bottom is how many strength cards get added in per character for the deck, and that's essentially going to represent its main health. So these 2 different cards are the different strength cards. So you have magic and physical enemy cards, and then you also have affliction cards, but those aren't going to be shuffled in just yet. You just get shuffled at the very start of the game. So you can see this is added in. You get 1 physical and 1 magic enemy card added into the game per character. So we have 2 characters in play. So in total, there's going to be 2 of each. So we're going to shuffle those up. We'll just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Again, it's sort of like Ant Trespass Odyssey, where you do get to see the top of that, so you sort of know what to expect. And go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we get, and they go into the stamina. So 1 of each per character. So there's 4 stamina cards total. Additionally, you will take only the physical enemy cards and place 1 in each open lane. And then you'll shuffle the Affliction deck, shuffle the Stamina deck, and you're pretty much off to the races. So how does the game actually work? The game works in 3 different phases, and you have this little tracker on the left to keep track of which phase you're in. Additionally, at what state the Guardian is in, or the enemy. There is a guarded state, and then, of course, a weakened state. Now, when it's in the weakened state, that is when you are able to actually deal actual damage to the boss. The whole point of the game is essentially just to get all these cards into the wound pile. And that essentially is how you win. It's either that or the characters are all removed from the board. Those are the 2 different outcomes. There are times where that can happen at the same time, and if that happens, you still lose. So you do have to make sure that doesn't happen. So, first things first, we are going to be starting with the refresh phase. So this is when the boss is going to add cards from the stamina deck into play, and these all, of course, have different things going for them, just ways to essentially ruin your day, whether it be raising your threat level, lowering your health, your mana, so on and so forth, or adding afflictions. Those are the main ones. Gaining threat, adding afflictions, adding corruption, or reducing your health. So in the refresh phase, the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to double check to see if there are any characters in the lane that don't have a card in front of them. You're going to immediately pull a card from the stamina deck and place it in there. So if we got rid of this card, for example, in the previous round, well, this would immediately add a card into the empty spot. And then on top of that, taking turns per character, you're going to roll dice equal to the refresh value listed on the card here. So in this case, the Guardian has a refresh value of 1, so we're only rolling 1 dice. And we are starting with, and this goes per character. When you roll a dice, you're going to add a stamina card into that lane as represented by the different numbers here, 1 to 5. If you roll a 6, you don't end up adding a card to the lane. So we're going to roll a dice for the Lancer. We get a 2, so we get a card added on top of this, and you lay it over like that so you can sort of see. And this card is considered the card on top. So whenever a game references like, hey, when you do damage, take off the top card and work your way down. We're going to be removing this one first. So that is the refresh for the Lancer, and then refresh for the Ronin. We get a 2 as well, so the Ronin has his work cut out for him here. So that is essentially going to end the refresh phase. If at any point there are no cards in the stamina deck, you have to pull from whatever cards are in the fatigue deck. But also at any point that there are no cards in the stamina deck, you flip over to the staggered side, the weakened side. So the whole goal is essentially either survive long enough or get rid of cards where there's no cards in the stamina deck, where you can flip it over to the staggered side, and then any cards that you remove from there on forth, you add to the wound pile instead of the fatigue pile. Whenever you do an attack and do damage and get rid of a card, if it's on the guarded side, it'll just go into fatigue, but if it's on the staggered side, it goes into wounds, and that, of course, is where you want the cards to go mainly. So after that is all done, we then move to the action phase, and this is where the characters get 2 actions per character. Characters can take turns in whatever they want to, but of course they have to finish their activation before moving on to the next person. And there are a bunch of different actions you can take. You can move. So when you move, you can move up to 3 adjacent spaces. You can't move diagonal in this game unless otherwise specified. However, you can move through other characters. So if I wanted to move, for example, to just to here, I could just go 1, 2. And of course, you always want to pay attention to abilities that the character has. You know, for example, the Lancer can, when you perform a move action, you can move to any frontline space. So if I was here, for example, I could actually just move all the way up here, even though that, there are exceptions to the rules, of course, but the rule is move up to 3 adjacent spaces, and that is considered 1 move action. And of course, you cannot end on top of another character, but you can move through them. Another action you can take is, of course, your basic attack action, which is going to be rolling whatever your attack value is for the dice. For example, the Lancer has 1 here. Ronin also has 1. Cards will also have this, using an ability, an active ability is also an action, and they'll represent a different amount of dice that you roll. So, for example, if I wanted to use this Provoking Pierce, I would pay its mana cost, which is 3, and I would roll 2 attacking dice rather than just 1. But a basic attack will just use whatever is listed on your character sheet. So if we wanted to do a basic attack, we roll 1 dice, and the goal is to beat whatever your threat value is. So this is where threat comes into play. So if my threat value was 3, I would have to roll at least a 4 or higher on the dice. It is only beat. You cannot meet or exceed. You have to make sure you're exceeding. However, of course, your very first attack of the game, you're always going to beat because it's impossible to roll a 0 in this. So we don't even have to roll, but of course you still want to roll because certain things come into play if we rolled a 5, which we just did. How convenient for my example. Because if we roll whatever our critical value is, and this goes for both recovery actions, which we'll get into later, or attacks, that is considered a critical success. So whenever you get a critical success or you beat your threat value, you deal damage equal listed on your character card. So Lancer only does 1 damage. Ronin here actually does 2 damage for his basic attack. So you get to remove cards from the lane in front of you, or from the area in front of you, from top to bottom, based on how much damage you do. So if we were in this lane, for example, and we did 2 damage, we would remove this card and put it into fatigue because it is still in the guard. He's still in the guarded state. And then we would remove this card and put it into fatigue. After you're done removing the cards, you actually look at how much total threat is on those cards, and you gain that much threat. So we would gain 5 threat in this case. However, because we actually rolled our critical success, you don't gain any threat on that attack. And you only gain threat on attacks that deal damage. Some cards will cause you to just instantly remove a card and place it into the fatigue deck. You don't get threat from that. So those are some ways to avoid threat. But let's just say, for example purposes, let's just say we rolled a 2. That would still be considered a success. We would do our 1 damage because our Lancer only does 1 damage, and we would gain that threat and go up to 3. So that would be one of our, let's just say my Lancer started there. That would be one of our actions with their Lancer. Another action we can take is we can take a recovery action. And recovery is sort of one of the ways you help mitigate or balance your threat and your magic, for example. So there's 3 different things you can do with a recovery action. All of them require rolling a dice. Well, not all of them. One of the ways first is just removing an affliction card. So if we had an affliction on us, which are just negative things that apply to your character, one recovery action just removes 1 card. Pretty straightforward. Two other ways that we can use a recovery action is we can gain MP back. So we would roll a dice. Let's say we used some of our MP. We're down to 3. We'll roll a dice, and you gain that much MP. We would only gain 1 MP in this case. However, if you roll your critical success value, you gain all of your MP back. So again, another way that this number comes into play. Just make sure you remember this number because, again, it's different for every character. Lancer's critical success number is 5, whereas the Ronin is only 1. And then the last way that you can use a recovery action is to reduce your threat. And it's probably going to be one of the most common ways you're going to be doing this. So we want to reduce our threat because we want to be able to attack later on, because you don't want to get your threat to 12 because that is very, very bad. And additionally, of course, the higher your threat value is, the harder it is to even succeed on attacks. For example, if we had a 6 on our threat, it would be literally impossible for our Lancer to actually succeed in attacking unless he rolls his critical success. So let's say we want to reduce our threat. Roll a dice. We get a 4, so we'd be able to reduce it by 4, and that would go back to 0. And that would essentially end our Lancer's activation. There is also another action you can take that is just going to be shattering. So when I was talking about shattering earlier, shattering typically only happens when you get to 12th threat. When you get to 12th threat, you instantly shatter, and you flip over your card, and you move to your shattered trait, or your shattered version of your character, where you have different HP values. You instead also don't have magic points. You have corruption instead that you try to manage. And then additionally, you get rid of all your item and ability cards, and then you instead draw a specific amount listed at the bottom of your card. You draw shattered abilities, which are just, different abilities typically quite strong. You also get new abilities. You get you get stronger stats. But of course, this is sort of your last life. If you end up getting to 0 HP here, or if you get max corruption, or max threat again from this point, then you just get removed from the game. You do get to reset all your stats though, so your threat goes back to 0, your corruption goes to 0, and your HP goes to whatever your starting value is on your sheet. And then the new number here is, instead of threat, that's your corruption max. So if I get to 5 corruption as my Lancer, that's just it. My character is done for. I succumb to the corruption. But this is why this is a purposeful action you can take, is you might want to actually purposefully shatter yourself to reset your stats and potentially have an extra chance at living. Because if you're on your heroic side and, at any point your character goes to 0 health, you're going to die at the end of your activation. What that means is, let's say during my activation and my first activation, I somehow get to 0 health. I don't die instantly. I still have one more action, but at the end of my activation, if I'm still at 0 health, then I'll end up getting removed from the board. So maybe if I don't have any ways to heal myself, I might want to just purposefully shatter myself to reset. So that is sort of how shattering works as well. And those are the different actions you can take. So we would have finished our action with our Lancer, or activation with our Lancer, and then Ronin is going to go as well. So let's just say our Ronin does his stuff, yada, yada, yada. You can see as well different types of abilities are in play here. Items as well don't take any actions, are considered a free action, but you have to flip it over, and that is considered being used. But you can see some items are reactions, for example, that you can definitely set up certain combos and stuff like that. So there's a lot of cool intricacies when it comes to what you draft and sort of how you plan out your characters for the battle. And then, of course, you have active abilities. And then there's also passive abilities that can come into play as well. Reactions, of course, can only happen once per round, or once per activation, sorry. But as long, they can potentially trigger in other phases. So just as long as the requirements are met. But during your turn, it's only going to happen once. And then we move on to the last phase, which is going to be, so after all the characters have gone, we move on to the last phase, which is going to be defend. So defending is where the enemy is going to sort of lay down some pain. So starting with whatever characters have a card in front of them, you're first going to sort of go down the row and double check to see if any of the total threat in that area is going to be exceeding the threat value on the boss. So we have a threat value of 9 on this boss here. We see this lane here has a total of 7 threat. Let's just say, for example's sake, we started the defense phase and we have a total of 10 threat, which is exceeding, meeting or exceeding the value of the threat area. That means you instantly look at the top card of whatever the threat is in that area, and you apply its negative effect to every single character. So that is sort of one thing you have to worry about, is to make sure to mitigate that you're not gathering threat too much in one area, because that's going to hurt everybody. But if not, you're then only going to reveal cards moving down the lane that have a character in it. So there's no character in lane or area 1, so we're not going to worry about that. But then there is a character in area 2. So we're going to reveal a card and apply its negative effects. Now, if there are 2 characters in the appropriate area, it's going to matter what type of strength card it's going to be. Let's just say, for example, there is a magic card in this lane as well. If there are 2 characters, the magic card is only going to affect the person in the back, and physical cards only affect the person in the front. However, if there is only 1 card, it doesn't matter what type of strength card it is. Both types will affect the only character in it. So it's also one way you can sort of balance or potentially tank some damage if you know sort of what the type of character is going to get hit by it. You might be able to move and plan ahead where a certain character is going to get hit by a certain attack and mitigate that. But we're just going to reveal 1 card here. It's going to be 2 damages. Again, there's really only a few different ways that it'll go. You have corruption symbols, and this draws you a certain amount of corruption cards. You have... they're all damage. this card is going to give you corruption, which if you're heroic, that doesn't add anything. Corruption only comes into play if you are on your shattered side. But then there's also threat cards as well, which we saw from this. So this card would add 2 threat and 1 corruption to the character. Let's flip these all back. But this is just going to be 2 damage to the Lancer here, and then that goes to the Fatigue. So then we are going to, of course, take 2 damage with our Lancer there, and then move on to the next card. So that's going to be a Corruption to the Ronin, which now we cannot use abilities, as well as we take a damage. So Affliction cards are very, very bad. But of course, we can just use a recovery action just to get rid of that card. But it is going to waste an action of ours, but something to worry about. And then at the end of the defend phase, if at any point there are no cards in the stamina deck, so let's say they've all been played out, you would then, also when there's no cards in stamina, you would be on the shattered side. So let's just say we shattered him earlier. If there are no cards in the stamina deck at this point, you take all the cards in fatigue, place it in the stamina, and it gets back to being guarded. So that's sort of the main goal, is to try to just sort of last long enough to reduce the stamina deck to 0 so you can get it to the shattered side. And then any wounds you do don't go to fatigue. They instead go to wounds. So then we would essentially restart and go back to the top. So there were still a couple of cards in stamina here. So we go back to the top of the round, going to refresh. And of course, at the refresh stage, you would check to see if any characters are in a lane that don't have a card in it. Then you would just immediately put a card into that lane and then doing your refresh rolls per character. So we'll roll for the Lancer here. The next stamina card is going to go to lane 2. So that's going to go into here. And then now immediately, since there's no stamina cards, it moves to the shattered side. So now we can deal it wounds, but there's still cards in fatigue, so the Ronin still has to do his refresh. So then we would pull from the fatigue deck instead. Well, we rolled a 6, so that actually means no cards get pulled, but let's just say we roll, just for example's sake, we roll a 4. Then we would pull from the fatigue, and that would get placed into there instead. And then you would just go so on and so forth. You would rinse and repeat. But now that the enemy has been shattered, when it comes to our action phase, and now we can do an attack. So let's just say our Ronin attacks here, and we're at threat level 0. So our attack is immediately going to succeed, and we do 2 damage. There's only 1 card in here, but that would immediately go to wounds instead, essentially removing it from play because the cards only come from the stamina and fatigue deck. So this is also a way that you can potentially get rid of really strong cards and plan ahead. Like, we know there's a really strong card at the bottom of this area. We might want to get rid of that while we can, while the enemy is weakened or shattered, or staggered. Sorry, we get shattered. So that is essentially the gist of it. You just rinse and repeat, go through those actions, and trying to essentially get all of the cards into the wound deck, and rinse and repeating. Now, the first wound that you deal when all of the cards are in the wound deck and there are no more cards in the stamina and fatigue deck, the first wound you do will flip the enemy over to its enraged side. I can't remember the specific name of it, but let's just say we did another wound. That was the last wound card. There's no more cards in stamina fatigue. We would then flip it over to the enraged side. So you can see the difficulty goes up a little bit. It gets lower threat range, threat limit. So its threat cards are going to be a lot more powerful. And then it gets a new ability, and then it could potentially augment the deck as well. In this case, the Guardian doesn't augment the deck. One thing I totally forgot as well is the rage cards. This should actually have been in the defense phase, because if they're at any point there when it's going through the defense phase and it's checking to see through each lane whether or not it needs to reveal cards to deal damage to the character, if there are no cards in that lane but there's still a character there, you draw from the rage deck instead, and these cards are extra bad. So these are cards you have to actually be wary of. There's only 5 cards in the deck per version, both the enraged side and the healthy side. And when they get resolved, they just go to the bottom of the deck. So when part of the high level play is actually memorizing the order of this deck, so you can sort of prepare and see sort of what happens. This also comes into play when you actually end up defeating the Guardian, because it has what is called the last gasp, where at the very last moment where you again defeat all the wounds on its enraged side, it gets to pull one more card that gets applied to every character and potentially have a last chance of killing you. So that is something to worry about. But of course, it flips over. When it gets to its enraged side, it would remove the wounds from the deck, and they would all get placed into stamina. So you're essentially trying to go through the whole cycle twice. However, some enemies, or most enemies, I think, after the Guardian, because he's the sort of the easiest version, there's also a different standee, which makes him a little bit cooler looking. So the bottom here, you would actually have the ways that it would augment the wound or the stamina deck, the enemy card deck, after it gets enraged. So let's just look, for example, at the Harvester here. Let's look at his card. So you can sort of see, if we flip his card over, you can see that he would actually remove 7 cards per character out of the 7 physical cards. However, he would add in a bunch of magic cards. So that sort of adds another layer of complexity, because the Guardian's pretty straightforward because he doesn't augment that stuff, but all the other characters or all the other enemies will augment how the deck works in their enraged state. But that is pretty much the main gameplay. That's the gameplay loop. It's very, very straightforward, and it's quite simple, which is what I really, really like. But at the same time, there's so many different combinations of characters as well as items that you start off with that you can choose from and draft to sort of have a very, very interesting, unique battle, which is very, very cool. And I do like how there's sort of an escalation mechanic. I do think it might even be a better solo game. I think the cognitive load that you have, even with 4 characters, isn't going to be that much more than, if you were actually playing a JRPG with 4 characters in it, which is very, very cool. The feeling that I was playing through like sort of the base Guardian fight, it definitely felt like a JRPG, especially with how the movement works and stuff like that. It definitely felt like an RPG. Because even though you have like very limited amount of abilities, that's sort of the same thing with JRPGs as well. Like you usually do a lot of the same abilities over and over. The complexity is, what order you do them in, how positioning works, when to recover, things like that. So, and that doesn't even come into play, or that doesn't even count in the fact that you also have sort of a totally separate character with the Shattered ability that also adds another layer of complexity to the game, which is very, very cool. I do also like how you can purposefully shatter yourself to choose to, maybe become a more powerful version of yourself, albeit more fragile version of yourself, to maybe do the final killing blow and have a better chance at killing the Guardian. Because as long as one character is still alive after the enraged version does their last gasp, you're going to win. So that is going to be it. That is Encounter Shattered Wastes. Again, I'm going to have a link to the website in the description below. Definitely sign up if you want updates or if you want access to this demo that I have as well. I'm going to talk a little bit more with the developer and the publisher and hopefully get a hand on a physical copy and a copy of the physical acrylic standees, because I really, really do like the look of them, and from the looks of it, I think they're going to be pretty high quality. And that's also another thing that I think I like about this game as well, is it seems like it's going to be pretty easy to set up and pretty easy to take down, and it doesn't seem like it's going to take up a lot of table space. So I'm actually quite excited to sort of learn more about this game and see how it goes. But again, Kickstarter should be starting sometime in February. Sign up for updates, and yeah, that's going to do it for me. In the future, definitely going to have some more Arkham Horror on the channel, definitely more Aeon Trespass Odyssey, more Final Girl. There's a lot more things to play, a lot more fun games to check out. And I got some more new stuff on the way as well. But until next time, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all later.